Welcome! Today I'm going to show you guys how to make a really easy quilt panel using my watercolor panels. These are on my website, stephanieritchieart.com. So the first thing you're going to need is obviously other fabric. So I'm going to use a blueberry fabric for the first border and then a cream color fabric for the second border. I want the first border to be 2 inches wide finished. So I'm cutting them at 2.5 inches and I'm just cutting up a fair amount of strips just to get me started. I think I ended up needing one more strip beyond what I cut here. But anyway, get a few cut and then we'll go on to the cream colored fabric. And this one I wanted to be a narrower border, and so I made these 1.5 inches. I'm adding 1/2 inch for the seam allowances. So when you're cutting whatever width you want, make sure you add on extra for the seam allowances. So my blueberry border will end up being a 2-inch border around the block, and then this cream color fabric will end up being a 1 inch, just slightly under 1 inch border around the blueberries. Anyway, and again, cut just a fair amount of your strips just to get you started. I'm using 6 panels as you saw in the beginning, so I just kind of guessed there. So I'm just going to show you one panel and then you can do the others. I'm going to start with that blueberry border and I'm just going to rough cut for length. So this makes it super easy. You don't have to measure. Just make sure you have a little bit of excess on either side, and I'm going to do the 2 long edges first. As you can see, and then I'm going to go sew those 2 long edges on before I do the next side. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, all throughout, and you don't need to worry about back stitching because you're going to lock those stitches in with the next round anyway. So sew both of those sides on, and then you're going to go to the sewing machine. The iron, and you're going to press those out. I like to press them out. And then the next step is super important. You're going to square up the panel before you put on the next one. You want that straight edge, square edge. So you'll see me squaring things up every single time that I add fabric onto the panel. So square those up really good. And then you're going to measure your next 2 edges. You want to leave, again, a little bit of excess, but again, you don't have to measure and have an exact length and worry about not having enough. Just leave yourself a little bit of excess on either end. Then you're going to go back to the sewing machine, again, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and sew those bottom and top on. I always do the long edge, so if it was a horizontal picture, it would be the top and bottom first. All of these panels are taller than they all are wider, and so we're going to do the long edges, sides first, and then the top and bottom. And you'll see when we add our next strip of fabric, the cream color fabric, that we again do the long edges first and then move on to the short edges. And sometimes it's a little more square than rectangle, but whichever one is longer, that's the one I prefer to do first. Once you get those sewn on, you're going to go back to your ironing board again and you're going to press those out. It's really important to get the pressing done on each step as well as the squaring up, because it just keeps everything straight and it's easier to work with that way. Once you get those edges pressed, you're going to square up now the whole entire panel. So you're going to want to do, I again do one long edge first, and then make sure I have the right width, know what width I am, trying to cut that final portion of this first border, and then I'm going to do that on all 4 edges. As you see, I'm cutting the short edge, and I like to do one long edge, and then I do the 2 short edges, squaring off that first straight cut, and then I go back and do the last long edge because now I have 2 points of reference to make sure that's square. And then once you get that all squared up, you're going to move on to the cream border. You can pick whatever colored fabrics you want. This is obviously blueberries and cream. You can do whatever colors you want. And there's a lot of options on my website for panels. These aren't the only ones. Again, we're going to sew the long edges first. As you saw, we measured those out, and we're not measuring super careful. So don't worry about that. We're cutting off all the excess. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. And like I said, the blueberry border is going to be a 2-inch border when it's finished. And then the cream color border will be a just slightly under 1-inch border. It's just kind of to give it a little bit of variety. On part 2, you'll see the fabric that I use as the background fabric. It matches, but it's not the blueberries and it's not the cream. So the white cream border gives it a little bit of change, a little bit of interest, so to speak. So you're going to sew those 2 sides on, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to go to the ironing board and press those. And I press those out. It's a cream color with the dark side border. If you want to press it under the other way, whichever way you prefer. I don't really think it matters, but some people think it does. So whichever one you prefer, do that. And then once you're done pressing, we're going to go back and square those edges up as well. Again, just the same as you did with the blueberry fabric, making sure you have 2 straight edges to sew your next strips on the top and bottom again. And cutting mat, super helpful, and long ruler, super helpful. It's nice to have those. And the rotary cutter obviously is critical as well. So measuring out the short sides, again, just leave a little bit of excess on either side. Obviously, if you're using the selvage edge, make sure you leave enough extra that you're not having the selvage inside the quilt where people can see it. Doesn't look as good. Sewing those top and bottom on. Again, the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And here I ran out of bobbin thread. I had to really quickly refill and go on. That's the only place I backstitched, is where I started in the middle, because there's nothing to lock it in place. So if you do run out of bobbin thread, that's something to think about. If you're in the middle of a seam, do a little bit of a backstitch there just to lock everything in place. And then once those edges are sewn on, we're going to go back to the ironing board. And this is the last press for this particular panel. Again, pressing that out. Like I said, I press it out away from me. You can press it towards the dark fabric, whichever one you prefer to do. And then we're going to go to the cutting board and square off this final panel. Again, you want to make sure you're squaring off now all 4 sides to the exact width you want. And remember that I shouldn't say exact width, you want to leave that 1/4 inch seam allowance plus whatever you want to finish it off. So for mine was about 1 3/8 inches. Well, probably not quite 3/8. Anyway, so when it's done, it'll be just under 1 inch. And that's kind of what I was looking for. So again, I square out 1 long edge, and then I square the 2 short edges with using that long edge, and then I do the last long edge with the 2 points. And it makes it super easy. You can also use your mat. The grid on your mat works really well to square things up as well. Anyway, so there's a finished fireweed. Like I said, there's 6 panels and this one is going to be just a throw. So I'm going to do a 2 by 3 sizing, and the next video is going to be putting in the background color, and this is what part of the quilt is going to require a little bit of math because none of these panels are exactly the same size, but before we sew them all together into the quilt top, we want them to end up being the same size using the background fabric, and I'll show you how to do that in the next video. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, I'd love it if you'd like and subscribe.